All right, yo. So in these drafts, we have TL versus Gam. Basically, this was the series that did end up sending Gam home, and I do think that there was a bit of a uncharacteristic type of drafting from the team on this day, which caused them to not be as flexible as they're used to. Because this is a team that basically hinges on strong side jungle, right? And you can actually kind of see that style get punished here because sometimes you need the flexibility in other roles, but this team is so hyper focused a lot on putting jungle as far back in the draft as possible. They kind of get punished for it. So I wouldn't say that TL plays this draft like excellently in terms of their planning, but they do it well enough to basically catch Gam lacking, if that makes sense. There's a lot of times where Gam will pick a certain laner that would be an excellent pick on like 4-5 or in phase 2, but because they have so few draft resources available to do so, it ends up being quite difficult for them to kind of execute upon this, and it kind of shoots them in the foot. So let's start with this first game. It was just actually a game that they get away with it, in my opinion, because TL don't have enough answers, or they chose not to have enough answers. So they lead with an Aurora opener, and I do think separately that this champ's going to go down in priority as well as the Ashe going up in priority as we get higher and higher. But this is because of the lane swap meta, which does cause the value of the Aurora in top lane to not be as high as potentially perceived, let's say. Because she thrives in lane as a ranged top laner, but when you nuke the laning phase and you potentially threaten dives a lot of the time, it becomes quite difficult to really get it off the ground, let's put it that way. And with that in mind, that's why I believe, the flexibility is the most important aspect of this draft. So Gam actually have a really solid start here where we go for the Jax Ashe, but the main thing is you keep in mind on this Braum on 3, right? This is the first example of that comp-defining sort of pick that is going to bite them in the foot eventually. And it is something that should punish teams that pick it too early, right? If Braum was a champion that would be that flexible and can be picked at any time, anywhere, then it would be something that has really high priority, right? But I don't really think that's the case historically for this champion. So that's why we end up shifting it around here. And in this case, TL don't actually have a response. This is because this is actually well played by Gam because they don't end up banning the Vi on 4, and then the Vi comes out, and when they pick the Vi, a lot of the counters that were available, let's say in terms of creating like a poke condition for TL, are now basically stunted because they have so many little weak mobile laners that Vi can basically lock down and guarantee, and it makes it very hard for TL to really play because their comp really hinges on this mobility. So even though they see the Braum early, TL don't really have much adaptation in order to counter it, and then Gam basically just lock in for a checkmate with just a solid front to back, and there's not enough oomph from this TL comp to really answer what's happening here. Game 2, it's basically the same draft except TL open up with completely differently. From Gam's perspective, it's very similar, and they're very safe, to be honest with you. But on the TL side, they actually go for a much different direction. So they actually go for a Nocturne Threaten opener, and this disincentivizes the Vi so that they don't have that same checkmate issue, which immediately makes this draft a lot better. They still go for the Braum 3, and it on paper, this would lead to a slightly concerning draft again from TL because they also commit to Kai'Sa on the B2, B3. What makes this a little bit more interesting, though, is that TL actually salvage it by picking like a soft, it's like a band-aid solution, right? They pick a soft engage that kind of goes through the Braum in the form of the Rakan, and with a Nocturne you can still get your targets technically because the Rakan engage and the Nocturne engage are basically forms of true engage. So even with the Braum, the Ashe is still going to get locked down potentially, and there's a lot of like point and click, like potentially nasty stuff. So if Vi comes through, it's much more favorable for TL, so they hedged against it this time, and they actually have decent lanes for the most part, with the exception of bot lane. So this gives them a much more room to play with in this case, right? The Aurora, it seems that Impact's not willing to play the other side of the matchup as well because maybe Team Liquid are they just embrace that this is one of their weaknesses and they're not able to really do too much about it. So this is why they went for this direction as well. Teams aren't going to be perfect in terms of a draft, and they have weaknesses and they have things they like to play for. So it's totally okay if they decide to lean into certain things and use bans to kind of facilitate that. Game 3, Gam will actually switch it up a little bit and they go for a Jax opener. which is like something that's going up and up in priority, and I think it makes sense because of the lane swap meta. However, TL basically go for the same sort of direction, and in this case, they actually do pick jungle early. The problem is they lock in their comp's identity too early because they want to get for some reason the Akali as a matchup here. It's basically a blind pick Akali, which is basically checkmate in itself. So you can kind of see why it's such an issue for this GAM draft. I would say they reveal what their comp's trying to do like so early on, and they give enough time for TL to basically just handpick the tools they need to essentially answer, right? You can kind of see now that it's a little bit confusing, right? If they wanted to go backward, or if they want to have more peel with the Poppy, but it basically counteracts what the rest of their comp wants to do. So their comp is not really cohesive in that sense. It doesn't, when it doesn't work together in that way, then it makes your comp really hard to really fully extract its value. Whereas TL's comp, it's pretty easy to pilot, let's put it that way, but at the same time, it's not a bad thing, right? It is cohesive. You can play for your engages, and you can play for the Ezreal poke condition, right? And you can, if they decide to go in with the Akali, if she's just diving the Ezreal for whatever reason, then you have the tools to actually potentially stop it. And that's what makes this draft so much more easy to pilot for TL. It makes it much more, you can lean into the comp more than you can lean into your players just trying to play out of their minds, right? That's basically the key here. So essentially, it was a little bit weird off that with GAM, and I wouldn't say it's like too crazy in terms of the dynamic of this draft and how it was defining, but it was definitely a bit of an off draft, and I do think TL deserved to win on the day, but it's just a little bit unfortunate to see that GAM were drafting a little off today. So you can kind of see why it's so important, specifically this World's meta, that the drafts be really dynamic and really flexible in terms of what you're looking for. And this is what case in point I want to just point out in this video. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.